Today, we come as we continue our study on spiritual disciplines, and we look at two different disciplines that don't necessarily go hand in hand with each other, but they are, as we have kind of organized things, first looking at spiritual disciplines that are vertically related to our relationship with God and scripture intake or Bible intake and prayer and worship. And then moving on to talking about those that are more inwardly focused. Last week, talking about silence and solitude, and then also journaling, which is really something private and kind of kept to ourselves and for ourselves for remembrance. And so this week, we turn to the second week of us talking to those that are a little bit more inwardly focused as spiritual disciplines. So first, we're going to talk about fasting and what fasting is. And fasting really is abstaining from something that is otherwise or is an otherwise good for the sake of focusing on God. And so that's the definition that I'll be working with as we talk about this. Abstaining from something that is otherwise good to focus on God. So I think sometimes we think of fasting and we relate it in particular in our Christian year to the season of Lent and the idea of giving something up. Oftentimes we give up something that's somewhat superfluous. I know sometimes people really kind of wrongly use that as a time to say, I'm going to get more healthy, or I'm going to diet, or whatever, or I'm going to give up chocolate. That seems to be kind of a common one. And maybe that is something we give up, and that's not wrong. But we don't give it up because we think this is an opportunity for me to make kind of a Christian New Year's resolution. That's not what fasting is. Fasting isn't giving up a bad habit or something that's bad or not good for us, but it is giving up something that is otherwise good to make space to focus on God. So one of the definitions or one of the excerpts that, as Donald Whitney talks about it in his chapter, he quotes Martin Lloyd-Jones, and so I want us to read this because I think it really strikes at the heart of what we're talking about when we talk about fasting. He says this about a wider definition of fasting, and so I quote him here. To make the matter complete, we would add that fasting, if we conceive of it truly, must not only be confined to the question of food and drink. Fasting really should really be made to include abstinence from anything which is legitimate in and of itself for the sake of special spiritual purpose. There are many bodily functions which are right and normal and perfectly legitimate, but which for special particular reasons or peculiar reasons in certain circumstances should be controlled. This is fasting. Therefore, I suggest there is a kind of general definition of what is meant by fasting. So I ask you this question because I truly believe that our society is one of impulse. It's one of immediate gratification. We can think now, it's just after midday, and I can think, well, I would like something to eat for lunch. And I have a full smorgasbord of fast food available or takeaway even in this pandemic. And I can call and within a few minutes basically eat whatever my heart desires from many regions of the world, in fact. And when we go to check out at the grocery store or the hardware store or any other store we might find ourselves in, almost every store has a kiosk right at the checkout counter for you to buy an impulse buy, a soda or a candy bar or a pack of gum or a keychain or whatever it is, little bits and baubles that we can add and just on an impulse and in an instant without thinking that we throw into our cart. And fasting is really the opposite of that. Fasting is an abstaining from things of the world to focus on God and to control and hone our impulses. We all likely have various food things that we like. Someone asked me on social media, or said generally, didn't ask me, what is 2020 the year of? And I kind of jokingly said, well, 2020 is the year of the taco. Just as 2019 was the year of the taco and 2021 will be the year of the taco because I love tacos. But there are times in which we refrain or abstain from something good to focus on God, to create space and to create, really, I think, a realignment of our hungers. So that rather than hunger after the things of this world, which may be created things that are good, that we focus and turn our hunger from the created to the creator. And that's what I think fasting is. And I think we need it in our culture, a culture in which we never seem to be able to see enough or hear enough. We don't abstain very often. We are a culture of indulgence. So that's fasting. So how will you fast? What will you fast about? What do you focus on? And Donald Whitney's chapter has many things that we'll talk about, many areas of what that purpose might be for us to fast. He mentions in there John Wesley every Wednesday and Friday would fast. He would fast basically from the time he got up at 4 or 5 in the morning until the afternoon. He would fast, and that was a spiritual discipline and practice that was woven into the rhythm of his living, that he might focus on God for those days, for whatever was going on. But it was his custom, it was his habit to do that. So it's fasting. The second one we want to talk about a little bit today is learning. And I think learning is important because we need to talk about learning for learning's sake. We live in what has been deemed the information age, and oftentimes we get overloaded and bombarded with information. And last week when we talked about silence and solitude, we talked in class about the reality that probably a century ago, there was not the material of learning that was available right at our fingertips. I mean, my kids are used to, and I'm used to saying, "Hey Google," or "Hey Siri, what's 10 times 10?" Whatever it is, whatever information it seems like that we want, we have the technology to get that information almost instantaneously. But just as quickly as that information comes to us, that information often flows out of our brain as well. And there's so much that we don't recall and we don't remember. And learning is not just about the consuming of facts, but learning is rather about a change of situation and circumstance. It's about being transformed by what we take in. So I want us to think about, and I would ask you to dwell on that a little bit, is what is it that enables you to take in information, Christian information, most particularly as we're talking here, that you hold on to it in such a way that you don't just know facts for the sake of factual sake, right? It's not just trivia or trivial, but rather that we take in and we consume for the purpose of wisdom. And that's something that Donald Whitney talks about in this chapter, right? That there are many proverbs that talk about how the wise think about things. So how is it, as Richard Foster says, that we live in a culture that has a severe lack of people who are deep? And when I think about learning, I think not just about degrees or schooling, but I think about that depth of knowledge where facts are taken in and processed in such a way, soaked in and saturated, so that there's a heart transformation, and that those facts, that knowledge, becomes wisdom in us. So fasting and learning, those are the two things we'll talk about this next week. God bless.